Hey, Dakota here, the old Pecan Homestead. We're going to be making some deer grind today, or tonight, and we're going to be using a beef brisket. I've already started slicing into that beef brisket. I'm going to save some of the flat for doing some just other cooking, and the rest of this I'm going to put into my deer meat. And I like brisket because it has a really rich beefy flavor. You're also, depending on the amount of deer meat that you have, you're going to want to have some extra fat. Beef brisket is already about 20% fat, so you won't have to add any for the brisket. But for your deer meat, whatever, you need a scale, or you need to be, you really need a scale to do this, to get your percentages fairly right. But for whatever your deer meat weighs, you're going to want to go about 15 to 20% fat by weight. So you're going to want some fat, and you're going to want some brisket or chuck roast or round roast. Beef, I prefer chuck roast or brisket because I feel like they have the most flavor of all the cuts. One time we bought a prime rib roast on sale after like Thanksgiving or something, and it made some really good grind. The fat was really good in deer meat. But anyways, let me get you turned around here so you can see the brisket I've started cutting up. I'm going to cut it up in about 1-inch cubes, as well as the deer meat. Here in a minute, I'm going to show you what I did to my deer meat to make it more palatable, especially for people who are newer to eating deer meat. Anybody who says I don't like deer meat probably hasn't been cleaned and prepared correctly. All right, so I've cut some of the flat off. I think it was a choice grade brisket, so the flat is a little lean, but right here, this is the money. This is where all that flavor is going to come from, and all that beef is going to be really good in this deer meat. You need lights right here. This brisket point is where you're going to get most of your flavor. That's why I like brisket. This right here is going to be so rich in flavor. And you're already going to be about 20% beef fat. We've got about 11 pounds of trimmed beef brisket. Like I said, it's probably already 20% fat. There's a lot of fat in a brisket. What I've done is I've separated out all the really hard fat that you don't necessarily want in your grind. And then you've got this big, like, I call it blanket fat. Whenever you cook this at 200 degrees or 250 degrees for 8 hours, this fat will render out really well in a brisket. But in a hamburger, these hard fats and this blanket fat across the flat of the brisket, you don't want. But all the leafy fat that comes apart, you can see how that comes apart right there. That right there is good fat. So all the fat in here is good. I've saved this. This is only about a pound of fat. That's why, even though you have all this other fat, you're going to want to have some extra beef fat just in case. So I've got about 1.5 pounds of fat here, and I'm going to want about 15% fat to deer meat ratio. Alright, so what we've got here is we've deboned the deer. We've already removed 90% of the silver skin and all of the fat, and we've brined it in a light salt water brine, very lightly salted, and a couple bags of ice for a couple of days. So now what we've got is big cuts of meat, deer meat, and we're going to keep this up in 1-inch chunks just like the brisket. And once we get it all in 1-inch chunks, we'll blend the 15 to 20% beef fat with the deer meat, with the beef, as evenly as we possibly can, and then we'll start feeding it in the grinder and making our grind, and then package it up in 1 or 2 pound packages, however you like to do it. And I'm gonna start cutting this up. See, you can see it's really discolored on the outside, but on the inside it's a real nice light red. Whereas if you hadn't done the brining, this would be like purple almost. It's so red. So looks a little funky when you brine it on the outside, but trust me, you still got a nice red meat. And I'm going to remove some of that extra silver skin as I cube this up, because you don't want silver skin or fat in any of it. Alright, so as you can see, the deer meat is laid out, and we came out to be almost perfect, about 1/3 beef to 2/3 deer. You can actually reduce that to even less, like 1/4 or 15% of your deer to beef ratio, or your beef to deer ratio. There's quite a bit of fat, as you can see, in the beef, so I only went 10% fat to deer, because there's probably maybe a little more, 20% already in the beef, so I didn't want to overdo the fat. But basically all we're going to do is mix all this up, and then we've got to get it on cookie sheets and into the freezer to frost it, and then run it through the grinder. And it has to be frozen to run it through the grinder, or the fat just won't make it. So right now, I'm just going to try to evenly blend this up. Once I get this blended up, we're going to put it back in these bowls and start chilling those in the freezer, and we'll start doing like a cookie sheet at a time. We have a small grinder, so 1 cookie sheet of grind will keep us occupied for a few minutes, and then we'll rotate another cookie sheet out. It takes about 15 minutes in the freezer or less to get frosted up good enough to grind. Alright, so I've got my meat lightly frosted. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run it on a coarse, and then we're going to rerun it on fine, so that the fat and the deer and the beef get blended up equally. What we did is we tried to run our thin, and it probably, our grind isn't quite as cold as I'd like it to be, so it clogs up a little bit. So what we did is we figure running it through the coarse twice will be plenty fine for us. If you like a really fine grind, you're going to want to get your meat a lot colder, and it'll run through the fine. But as you can see, if it's not cold, it plugs up pretty good. But overall, I kind of like a little coarser, especially with deer meat, because it has a little bit more of a solid texture versus the texture you're more used to with beef. So anyways, let's Shayla get this packaged up, and we'll have another batch to grind in about 20 minutes. All right, so Shayla's bagging. This is why you need a scale. She's trying to get it to 2-pound bags, about what we generally cook for dinner. We're using the Cabela's. It's like a, I would almost say professional grade model, but it's supposed to be commercial grade. Works pretty good.
None of them really work that great with.
As long as your meat is really dry, or your vegetables or whatever, it works really, really good. But if you have any liquid on them, like fish, we have a hard time getting fish to seal up the way we want. A big shadow right there. You can't really see the. Our lighting's terrible in our kitchen. But you can see there's a good amount of nice beef fat in there. This is going to give you a burger grind that is very, very similar to beef, but still has that unique deer flavor.
Sure that one place froze their things a little bit before they packaged them. I don't know how they got them so perfectly square. Layers.
And you can take. We have in the past taken a handful of ice cubes and ground them up with it to keep the grinder cool. Because when the grinder gets warm, that's when you start having mushing rather than cutting. And your grinder will plug up with fat. But you can do that, but what you get is a lot of moisture in your hamburger meat. And then when you go to brown it to cook chili or tacos or hamburgers, you get a lot of moisture coming out of the hamburger meat.